If there's one thing that remained common between a medieval peasant's life and the life of a kid today, it's their mutual love for bacon. And I mean, who can blame them? Sweet, salty, a little chewy, or maybe a little crispy, and most of all, absolutely finger-licking delicious. But while the food might be a staple on breakfast tables worldwide, the fact of the matter is that most people don't actually know where bacon comes from, let alone how it's made. So that's what we'll be going to be talking about today. And what better place to start than by talking about the source of it all: the meat. On the surface, bacon is nothing more than medium to low quality pork that has been prepared in a specific way. That being said, not any piece of a pig can be used to make bacon. That job is set for the part of the animal's stomach and chest known as pork belly. The reason this piece of pork is used is that it's not only rich in fat, which makes it super flavorful, but because of the fact it has a thin and chewy nature, meaning that it doesn't really have that many practical uses elsewhere. In fact, experts believe that the reason people started making bacon in the first place was to use up the parts of an animal they otherwise would have wasted. Regardless, the process starts with fresh pig carcasses reaching the factory, where they are first cleaned using power washers before industrial cutters trim the animal's front and back ends, which get turned into ham and pork shoulder respectively, leaving behind only the animal's torso. Then another blade slices that bit down the middle before slicers trim off the meatier parts like the pork loin and ribs. Once this is done, all that's left is a large, almost rectangular piece of pure, rich pork belly. Skinning. Once the pork belly has been freed from the rest of the cuts, it can be sent to the bacon factory. But before the actual making of the bacon can take place, the factory has to prepare the belly for cooking and curing. For this, they first throw the freshly cut pork bellies into a large tumbler that spins and throws them around for a few minutes. This not only softens up the meat for the later stages of bacon making, but it allows the skin to become slightly loose from the meat, which comes in handy when the softened bellies are put skin side down onto a conveyor belt for skinning. This job is done by a set of very sharp blades that trim off the animal's tough skin, separating it from the meat. And once the pork has left the trimmer, it's allowed to fall across a set of conveyor belts that then remove the skin entirely and send it off to another plant where it'll be used to make stock or pork rind. As for the pork belly, it continues on the conveyor belt before some workers flip it upside down, exposing the skin so that some workers check to see if there's any skin the slicer missed. And if there is, they quickly remove it using a super sharp mechanical blade, leaving only clean slabs of pork, which are now ready to receive their bacon treatment. Brine and curing. By far the most important part of the bacon manufacturing process, and the one which separates bacon from just plain cooked pork, is the act of curing. You see, back when people didn't have refrigerators, they had to invent different ways to preserve things, like meat, so that they could enjoy them later. And one of the ways they did that was by letting the meat cure in a special mixture of salts and sugar before cooking it slowly in smoke. This would not only kill all the germs, but it would dehydrate the meat, making it tough and spoil resistant. And as a bonus, the combination of the salts, the smoke, and the entire process also ended up in the meat, acquiring a very unique and delicious flavor. The very flavor you and I enjoy when we have bacon. Now, back in the day, butchers would have used a mixture of salts, including common table variety, as well as things like celery salt, which is rich in curing nitrates, to cure the bacon. However, nowadays, factories forego the entire thing and simply use chemical salts directly. In this factory, a proprietary blend of things like regular sodium chloride, sugar, and sodium nitrate is dissolved in a specified amount of clean water before dissolving it thoroughly to create a sort of curing brine. And because it is a factory, they also add some artificial or natural flavorings to this brine to add that extra oomph to the bacon. And once this curing solution is ready, it is finally time to apply it to the pork. Here, once again, To quicken the process, instead of the meat staying in the solution, a set of metal injectors over a conveyor belt are used to inject the curing solution into the meat, making sure that it remains flavorful and tender throughout. These brined pork bellies are then allowed to rest anywhere from half an hour to a full 7 days depending on the thickness of the pork, as well as the kind, with most factory-made bacon being cured for just over 72 hours, or 3 full days, during which time they stay in a controlled dry room to allow the curing to do its magic. And finally, once the 3 days are over, the now much drier pork bellies can be sent over to the next stop: smoking. This is the second part of the bacon equation, and it's what gives bacon its signature smell and color. And while you may think that this is the result of actual smoke, most factories actually use liquid smoke, which is a product made by condensing wood fire smoke, which is actually getting absorbed into the bacon, making it even smokier than with regular smoke. To apply this, the cured strips of pork belly are attached to sets of steel hooks called combs before being hung off racks that will spend the next moments in a chamber, where they'll be bombarded with a constant flow of liquid smoke and flavoring. And finally, to fully bring all those flavors to life, these racks will then be rolled into a very low temperature oven where the pork will be allowed to slowly cook and dry out over the course of the next 5 to 6 hours. The end result of this will be deeply flavored, rigid, and barely darkened pork bellies, ready to be sliced into perfect little bacon strips. But before that can happen, the meat has to spend some time in the chiller. While it is by no means a necessary step, in most factories, after the pork bellies have been thoroughly cooled down outside the oven, they're rolled into a low-temperature chiller that will not freeze the meat, but will cause it to become rigid and dry. Trimming and slicing. Here, the cooked and now rigid pork bellies first pass a set of sharp trimmers that take off any excess bits from the bellies to make sure that they are all the same size. Once this is done and the meat is in perfectly sized rectangles, it then passes through a metal detector to check for any residual bits from the hanging combs from earlier. And finally, once each pork belly is uniform in size and checked to be clear, it is loaded into a special slicer by a worker that slides the piece of meat back and forth across a set of sharp blades, kind of like a deli slicer, multiple times until the piece is all cut up. The results of this are thin, perfectly shaped bacon strips that fall onto a conveyor belt below and are all ready to grace any breakfast table with some sweet goodness. But first, we must contend with the browning. Now, old school butcher shop bacon would be perfectly fine to sell at this point, but for most other kinds of manufactured bacon, the meat has to be browned one final time before it can be sold. This is both to make the bacon pieces smaller, but also to further enhance the preservative ability of the meat. For this, the bacon strips from earlier are sandwiched between two netted conveyor belts that secure them for a short stint in an oven that both slightly cooks the meat while rendering out some of the fat, which is collected by funnels into a chute that collects it for later use in things like pet food and gravies. And when the browning process is complete, the bacon is finally ready to reach the last station on its journey: the packaging. Here, a set of conveyor belts and other machines first collect the bacon into one long line of perfect slices that'll be the envy of any hungry person, before a set of electrical cameras and tools separates the bacon into perfect groups of set numbers for packaging. These groups then slide onto paper or plastic trays or sheets before being vacuum sealed and sent off to the cardboard boxes, where once stacked and packed, the bacon will go to hungry mouths everywhere in the world. Click on one of the two videos on your screen right now. We'll catch you guys in the next one.